The crystal glasses clinked as my mother set the table for our family dinner. Everything looked perfect, just like always, the silverware shining, fresh flowers in place. In our family, appearances were everything. "Pass the salt, Rebecca," my brother Michael said without looking up from his phone. His expensive watch flashed under the light as he reached for his glass. I slid the salt shaker across the table, feeling my mother's disapproving stare. I had come straight from my hospital shift, still in my scrubs under my jacket. In the Bennett family, looking perfect was more important than anything else. Once again, I had failed. As my father cut his steak, he cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have been discussing the family trust." I felt uneasy. His serious tone, and the way my mother suddenly focused on her wine glass, told me this wasn't going to be good. "We've decided to make some changes," he continued, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Michael needs extra support, and as the only son carrying the Bennett name." "You're cutting me out," I said. Michael smirked. "Don't be so dramatic, Becca. It's just business." "Business?" I set my fork down. "Is that what you're calling your gambling debts now?" "Rebecca," my mother snapped. "That's enough. Your brother is going through a hard time. He's lost $3 million in 6 months," I said angrily. "And now you're giving him my share too." "The money will help Michael get back on track," my father said. "You have a career, Rebecca. You make enough money." The way he said career felt like an insult. My family were wealthy investors and real estate developers. They had never accepted my choice to become a nurse. "What about my student loans?" I asked, already knowing the answer. The trust was supposed to help pay them off. "You can handle them yourself," my mother said coldly. "It's not like you went to a prestigious school." No, I hadn't gone to Harvard like Michael. I had chosen a good state university and worked part-time to pay for it. "This isn't about my loans," I said, pushing back my chair. "It's about you spoiling Michael again." Michael's smirk disappeared. "Watch yourself, little sister." "Oh, I know exactly who I'm talking to," I shot back. "A spoiled addict who never faces consequences." My father slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses shake. "Rebecca, you will show respect in this house." I stood up. "Respect? Like the respect you showed me when you promised to support my education, or the respect you show Michael by funding his mess?" "You don't understand," my mother began, but I cut her off. "No, I do understand," I said. "Michael gets endless chances, endless money, while I get nothing." I gestured around the room at the fancy dinner, the polished silver, the illusion of a perfect family hiding the truth. My father's voice was cold. "Perhaps if you had chosen a more suitable path." I laughed bitterly. "You mean if I had gone into finance, married someone you approved of, and played along with your fake image?" "Now you're being childish," Michael sneered. "This is why you never fit in." His words hurt, because deep down I knew they were true. I had never belonged in this family. My mother always corrected my speech, my father was always disappointed in me, and Michael? He had always been their favorite. But they didn't know something. 3 weeks ago, while helping our housekeeper Mrs. Chen clean a storage room, I found a hidden safe. Inside were documents, proof of where the Bennett money really came from. Shady deals, ruined lives, and illegal business practices. I had copied everything. Now standing at that table, knowing they had abandoned me, I thought about the USB drive hidden in my apartment. "You're right, Michael," I said. "I'm not one of you. And thank God for that." I turned to leave, but my father's voice was sharp. "If you walk out that door, Rebecca, don't expect to come back." I looked at them one last time. My mother sat stiffly, my father glared, and Michael looked smug. They thought they had won. "Don't worry," I said with a smile. "I won't be back, but you might want to check the news next week. I hear there's going to be a big story about the Bennett family's business." My father's face went pale. "What did you say?" I was already walking away when I heard Michael's panicked voice, my mother's worried questions, and my father barking orders. Let them panic. Let them wonder what I knew. Let them be afraid of what was coming. The next morning, I woke up to 37 missed calls and countless messages. My father's texts started as threats but turned into warnings. My mother tried to make me feel guilty, begging me to stop. "Think carefully about what you're doing. Some things can't be undone." She shook her head. "I've worked for your family for 30 years. I know how to keep secrets." Then she reached into her bag and pulled out an old, worn leather journal. But there's something else you need to see. The Bennett family's wealth didn't come from hard work or smart business. It was built on lies, threats, and crime. Before he died, my grandfather wrote everything down, maybe to make up for what he had done. But my father hid the truth and kept running the family like a crime organization, pretending we were respectable. I looked at Mrs. Chen. Why are you showing me this now? Because you're different, she said. You see people as people, not tools to use. Like your grandfather, in the end, you know what's right and wrong. For days I worked quietly. I made copies of the files, gathered proof, and acted like nothing had changed. But I knew my family was watching me. Every time I left my apartment, I saw a black SUV following me, my father's security team. On Thursday, I met Sarah Martinez, a reporter who had spent years trying to expose my family's crimes. We met in a busy coffee shop, far from their reach. This is huge, she said, looking at the files. We suspected most of this, but never had proof. Is it enough? I asked. She nodded. More than enough. The FBI has been investigating your father for years. This could be the final piece they need. That night, I had an unexpected visitor, my mother. She stood at my door, dressed in expensive clothes, her makeup perfect. Whatever you're planning, she said sharply, stop, for the family's sake. For the family's sake? I repeated. Or for your sake? She flinched. It's not that simple, Rebecca. Your father does what he must to protect us, to protect our legacy. Legacy? I interrupted. Is that what we're calling fraud, threats, and grandfather's murder? Her face went pale. What did you say? You heard me. I know everything, where our money really comes from, what happened to grandfather, all of it. She sat down, her perfect posture finally breaking. You don't understand, she whispered. Your father, he can be dangerous when threatened. Is that a warning or a threat? She looked at me, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. Both, she said. Please, Rebecca, don't do this. But it was too late. Sarah's article was finished. The FBI had copies of everything. There was no stopping what was coming. I'm sorry, Mom, I said. But the truth has to come out. She left soon after, looking older and more fragile than ever. On Sunday morning, I sat in my kitchen, sipping coffee, waiting for the fallout. At exactly 6:00 a.m., my phone exploded with notifications. The news was everywhere. Bennett empire built on lies. Decades of corruption exposed. Sarah had done an amazing job. The article exposed everything: fraud, threats, money laundering, and the truth about my grandfather's death. Every accusation had solid proof. At 6:15 my father called. His voice was cold. Do you realize what you've done? I told the truth, I said calmly. Something grandfather tried to do before you had him killed. He took a sharp breath. You don't understand. I did what I had to do to protect this family. That's always been your excuse, I said. Every crime, every lie, all for family. Then, after a long pause, he spoke again. The FBI is here. They have a warrant. I know, I replied. They have everything. The fake accounts, the shell companies, the proof about grandfather. It's over. Silence. Then he said, your brother is asking for you. He's not handling this well. I thought about Michael, watching everything he knew fall apart. Tell him his gambling debts are the least of his problems now. By noon, the Bennett empire was falling apart. The FBI raided our offices and our home. My father and his top men were arrested. The company's stock crashed 60% in an hour. Mrs. Chen called to tell me my mother had locked herself in her room, refusing to speak. Michael had disappeared, but the authorities had flagged his passport. I watched it all from my apartment, feeling strangely numb. This was justice. Messy, painful, but necessary. At 3:00 p.m., Detective James Morgan from the FBI came to see me. You've given us a strong case, he said, but we need you to testify in court. Are you ready for that? I nodded. I'll tell everything I know. He studied me. It won't be easy. Your father has powerful friends, and testifying against your own family. They stopped being my family when they chose money over doing what's right, I said. I owe it to my grandfather. He tried to fix things in the end. The next few months were a blur of court hearings, media attention, and endless questions. Michael was caught in Monaco and sent back for trial. My mother filed for divorce, claiming she knew nothing, though the evidence said otherwise. The trial became a media sensation. Every day, more details of my family's crimes came out. Former employees testified about the illegal activities they had been forced into. Through it all, I kept working at the hospital. Helping others gave me purpose. My coworkers protected me from the worst of the media storm. A year later, I sat in court for my father's sentencing. He looked smaller, weaker in his prison uniform. "I did everything for this family," he said, "and you destroyed it. I hope it was worth it." I met his gaze. "No, Dad, I saved it. Grandfather would be proud." The judge sentenced him to 25 years. Michael got 15. The Bennett empire was dismantled, its assets sold to repay victims. My mother moved to Europe, avoiding the scandal. She still sent me careful, polite emails, pretending to have dignity. Mrs. Chen stayed in my life. She became more of a mother to me than my real one ever was. "Your grandfather would be proud," she told me. "You did what he couldn't. You chose the truth." The Bennett fortune was gone, but I had something more important, my integrity. 2 years later, I stood at my grandfather's grave, placing fresh flowers on his headstone. His final confession was locked safely in a deposit box, its truth already told. "I did it, grandfather," I whispered. "I finished what you started." My phone buzzed. A message from the hospital. A patient needed care, real work, honest work. As I walked away, I thought about legacy, not the kind built on money and power, but the kind built on truth and courage. The Bennett name was ruined, but I had found something better, my own path. My father had been right about one thing. I was never one of them. And that had been my greatest strength.